Hello and welcome to the final lesson of this course. Here we're going to learn the last technique to achieve the shape of our dragon. We'll need to learn how to divide the polygons to get a higher number of them and also to detail more. We'll also add some more pieces to our tool, like the eyes and horns. First, we'll start with the eyes. For this, we'll add a subtool. What's a subtool? A subtool is one of the pieces that makes up a tool. Our tool can have lots of pieces attached to it, and each of those pieces is a subtool. In the previous video, we made the sockets for the eyes, so we can put them in place easily. We just need to create the subtool. In this case, we'll make the eyes using two spheres. Go into Geometry, Subtool and click on Append. A window will open that's similar to the one that opened when we created the sphere, and again we'll make another sphere. As you see, inside the Subtool window, we now have two pieces, the head of our dragon and the sphere, which you can see in the viewport. Right now, you can only edit the subtool that's selected, in this case, the dragon's head. What we need to do is to switch between one subtool and another. To do this, you have two options. Go to the subtool menu and then select the subtool you want, or click on the subtool you want while holding down Alt. Once the sphere is selected, put it in place with a normal scale, and for that we need to learn how to use the Transpose Master. The Transpose Master is a scaling, rotation and subtool moving tool. It's used to place a subtool wherever you need without using brushes. At the top you have these three tools: Move, Scale and Rotate. Select Rotate and you get an orange line with three orange balls. All you have to do is click where you want and drag to create the orange line. All you have to do is click where you want and drag to create the orange line. To scale, you need to place your cursor above the third orange ball and a red circle will appear. Click inside the red circle and move the mouse to the beginning of the orange line to scale. Repeat this action as many times as you need until you get the size you need. Right now the bust is in our way. We need to hide it somehow. To hide a subtool, go to the subtool menu and click on the eye that's next to the head. Clicking on this eye hides the dragon's head, allowing us to scale the eye easily without anything in our way. Make the final touches with the bust visible, and when this is done, we can start to think of how to place it. We just need to move the subtool into place, so put the eye at the height of the socket, but this time click on the white circle that appears when you place the cursor over the second orange ball. Bit by bit, we'll put the eye into place. We need to duplicate it, so we have two symmetrical eyes. If you press Shift while creating the orange line of the Transpose Master, the line is created completely straight and we can place it with a 45 degrees variation. To move the subtool in a straight line, press Shift while clicking on the white circle in the middle. The same way we moved the eye horizontally, we'll now move it vertically. Place the Transpose Master facing upwards, again pressing Shift and again pressing Shift, click on the circle in the middle to place it. Now activate symmetry to see what happens when we duplicate symmetrically. What we use to duplicate is the x-axis, the red one. In geometry, see how the subtool that we have selected doesn't have the Dynamesh activated. This is because each subtool saves its own settings. So we could have some subtools with Dynamesh and some without, like in this case. Now, as you can see, the eye doesn't have the Dynamesh activated, but when we change to the head subtool, it does. This is just to show you what I was talking about earlier. Once the eye is placed on the left, we can duplicate it to have one on each side. For this, go to Geometry, Modify Topology, and then go to the Mirror and Weld tool. You see that, like the Floor tool, we also have X, Y, and Z, so we duplicate on any axis. We'll use the X-axis. How do we know which one that is? Simply draw a line between the 2 points we want the sub to have. In our case, it's a vertical line that coincides with the X-axis. When we've duplicated the eye, activate the Draw mode again, shortcut Q, and we'll move on to the next tool. Okay, let's deactivate the symmetry to continue working on our subtool. Remember that to keep working, we need to activate the Edit Object mode and exit the Transpose Master mode, otherwise we can't carry on working. Once Edit Object is activated again, we'll go on to make the eyelids for the eyes. To do this, select the clay build-up brush and apply it to the top and bottom of the eye. Make sure when you're working that the symmetry is activated. If it isn't, you'll have to go back in the project to the point where it was activated. Finish up with the eyelids and the face before moving on to the next step. Remember to constantly rotate the model so you can always see it from every angle and correct wherever you need to. Don't worry if you see polygons in the model. That actually means you're doing a good job. You just need to make sure that the shadows explain the volume well, and the general shape is what we are looking for. Now we're getting to the maximum detail we can with our tool. That means it's time to start adding some more detail to the model. As you can see, our model isn't really divided right now, and as the topology isn't going to be modified anymore, we won't do any more Dynamesh. We'll divide the polygons so there are more. So to divide the geometry, we need to be in the Tool menu inside the Geometry menu and press the Divide button. When we divide the model, we realize that all the polygons we could see are much softer than before. That's because we now have a larger number of polygons. What the subdivision does is it takes each polygon and traces a straight line from the middle of each of its sides, dividing it into 4 polygons. That happens every time we subdivide. As you can see, when you activate the polyframe after having divided, you can clearly see how all the polygons are divided in 4. If we increase the number of subdivisions, so if we keep dividing the model, each of the polygons will be again divided into 4 until we end up with such a dense mesh of polygons that you won't even be able to make them out. When you subdivide, levels of subdivision are generated in the geometry menu. You can change these levels and go from one to another with the slider. You should always start with a very low level of subdivisions so you can easily generate volumes, and from there you can increase and add more detail to each level. If you don't follow this procedure and you start to generate shapes and volumes starting with many subdivisions, you'll find it very difficult later to correct any mistakes or problems you might have. You can also erase subdivision levels if you divide the geometry a lot. Then you'll have many levels of subdivision. On any level you want, if you select Delete Lower, all the previous levels of subdivision will be erased, and if you select Higher, then all the subdivisions after it will be deleted. So as you can see, with such a dense mesh, any kind of detail or adjustments we make will be visible, as if we were working on clay. And as mentioned in the first lessons, here we can see the details of the alphas. The clay build-up has a square-shaped alpha, and right now, with the high density of the mesh, you can clearly see the effect. Working with such a high level of subdivision, any detail we want to add might be impossible to erase later, as there are so many polygons. However, if we have a lower subdivision, when we add any details, it's much easier to erase. That's why it's so important to differentiate between the phase of generating basic shapes, where we started, and the detailing phase, the final phase of any model we sculpt. So let's leave the model divided once, and we'll start to detail after the second division. Bear in mind that if you subdivide a lot and then work on the second level, so let's say you had 5 levels of subdivision, and then you go to the second level, the original model would end up deformed, as after softening so much, it would look like we had applied smooth to the model. We'll use Trim Dynamic again to achieve those hard shapes we got in the previous division. When we subdivide, all the polygons soften, as they go from being flat to having 4 more vertices, which gives them a curve. So after ending up more or less with a harder shape, we'll have to go over it again to get the same effect. But thanks to this, later on, we'll be able to make small adjustments to modify the original shape. Despite what I told you at the beginning about having the brush as large as possible, we should modify the brush depending on what we're using it for. So right now, we have the basic shapes. Sometimes we might have to make some details stand out, such as the nostrils, the eye sockets, the eyelids, and for that, we need an appropriate brush. Let's mask the areas we want to block and work on the others to generate volumes and gradually add details. In this case, we're going to mask the upper jaw, so make the lower jaw a little harder. We need to do it like this, as if we don't block the upper jaw, our brush, the Trim Dynamic, will also affect the upper jaw and the line of the mouth. Eventually, it would end up erasing it, and we don't want that, as we had managed that both jaws were at a different distance. With the damped standard, you can trace lines, like we're doing with the jaw, and with that, you can get the desired effect, making it look like a separate piece and making it even harder. All that's left to finish generating our shapes is to adjust and constantly move our volumes so they look as much like the reference as possible. Bit by bit, with experience and practice, we'll make our models much faster as we'll integrate the ideas much better in our head. After repeating a model many times, you might not even need a reference. Remember to constantly rotate the model to see it from different angles. You need to see it from above, behind, from the top, the bottom, to make sure that the shapes you want are the shapes we have or that we're getting on our model. We'll carry on hardening the features of the dragon with the move and the trim dynamic. We can apply it to the bottom of the lips to get that border and that hardened corner we want. Keep softening the model every now and then to get rid of those lumps you get after using so many brushes. If you soften in these levels of subdivision, these lumps will disappear. Now, gradually we'll add different horns, just as we did for the eyes. We'll include a subtool and shape it bit by bit. Then, with the mirror and weld, as we did for the eye, duplicate the horn symmetrically. With both horns selected, activate Transpose Master to place the horns in their position, and activate Symmetry to move them symmetrically. Now, to carry on with the horn, activate the Dynamesh, as we're looking to generate different volumes to those of the sphere. We can move our model with the move. If you see that the model isn't working because the polygons are stretched, simply use Dynamesh. To do that, make a mask in an empty area that doesn't touch our subtool and carry on stretching and applying Dynamesh until you get what you want. I find this part the most fun. Just try out different things. The same way we use Scale and Move with the Transpose Master, we can use Rotate. Using for the starting point of the rotation, the first point we click on with the mouse, and as the end point where we let go of the mouse. This allows us to easily pivot the model so we can adjust it from the point of view we like, without having to adapt it with the move. As I said earlier, after seeing that our model works from different viewpoints, we're going to do what we did before with the eyes. Leave the horn on the left and activate the ground to see what axis we need to duplicate. In this case, as before it was X, Go back to Mirror and Weld in the Geometry menu and modify Typology. Make sure that in Mirror and Weld, the X-axis is activated, otherwise the mirror will be made on a different axis. Once the horns are duplicated, we'll do what we did with the rotate. Click on the base of the horns, and from there, start to move after pressing X or activate symmetry, to move the two horns and rotate them symmetrically without moving them individually. Once you have the position you like, after seeing it from different angles, we leave it there and carry on with the next horns. Now, as I said before in the previous lesson, we'll follow the same process to make 2 or 3 more horns on the jaw. And we'll do that the same way we did the eyes or the other horn. Select Append in the Geometry menu, Subtool, create another sphere, scale it and put it in place. We'll use Dynamesh with a low subdivision so we can adjust our shapes properly. Once you have it to your liking, go over it with the trim dynamic to harden it a bit. Remember, you can hide the rest of the subtools clicking on the eye in the subtool menu. But this time we'll do it differently. We're going to hide all the subtools, leaving the horn visible. So if we click on the eye in the subtool we have selected, the rest disappears. Gradually adjust the shapes and harden the model with the trim dynamic as we said before. Once we have it to how we like it, we can use Mirror and Weld to pass it over to the other side, or we can do the 3 horns on the same side, then Mirror and Weld each one of them. So we don't have to constantly do the same thing, making a ball and generate the shape. What we're going to do is take the same horn and select Duplicate in the Subtool menu. Duplicate our horn. As you see, we now have a copy in the Subtool menu, and now with the Transpose Master, move and scale it to adjust it to the size we want and place it where we need it. We'll do the same with the horn we place on the front. Looking at references, you can see that around a horn, a tooth, or something similar, usually there's some volume surrounding it. So we'll try to emulate that, creating some volume around the horns. Once you're happy with the volume you created, you need to soften it, otherwise you'll end up with lots of lumps, and that's not what we want. Try to integrate the volumes you make of any shape. For example, in this case, we could integrate them making a volume around the horns, but the starting point is always the same. It's always good to have references to base yourself on and observe these things on natural models. So once you have everything as you like it, take 3 horns in the Subtool menu and go to Geometry again, selecting Mirror and Weld for each one of them to duplicate them on each side. And once that's done, our bust is done. Okay, so this is the end result of our ZBrush introductory course. I hope you found it useful and you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time for another Tutsbat course. Bye!